The frozen wind howled through the mountain pass like 1,000 angry wolves, and Brianna Thompson clutched her threadbare coat tighter as the stagecoach lurched violently to one side, throwing her against the wooden bench hard enough to bruise her shoulder. It was December 1883, and she had traveled all the way from Philadelphia to this God-forsaken wilderness to marry a man she had never met. The advertisement had seemed almost too good to be true back in September, when she had found it tucked between the pages of a discarded newspaper at the boarding house, where she worked 16 hours a day for barely enough to keep herself fed. Respectable rancher in Colorado Territory seeks educated woman of good character for matrimony. Room, board, and security provided. Must be willing to work hard and build a life in the West. She had responded immediately, her hands trembling as she penned the letter by candlelight, careful to make her penmanship as neat as possible despite her exhaustion. 3 months of correspondence had followed, each letter from Decker Lawson more encouraging than the last. He wrote of his cattle ranch in Las Animas, Colorado, of the mountains that touched the sky and the endless stretches of grassland where his herd grazed. He wrote of loneliness too, of long winters spent in isolation, and the need for companionship that went beyond mere survival. His words had been simple but honest, and Brianna had found herself looking forward to each letter with an eagerness that surprised her. He had sent money for her passage west, enough to buy a decent dress and shoes that did not have holes in the soles, and she had set out 3 weeks ago with a mixture of hope and terror that made her stomach clench. Now, as the blizzard raged around the stagecoach with a fury she had never imagined possible, that terror had crystallized into something sharp and cold in her chest. The driver had been shouting something about finding shelter, but his words had been torn away by the wind. Through the frosted window she could see nothing but white, an impenetrable wall of snow that seemed determined to swallow them whole. "We cannot go on," the driver finally managed to yell, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Have to wait it out." Brianna pressed her face against the window, trying to see anything beyond the blinding snow. She had come so far, endured so much, and now she might freeze to death within miles of her destination. The irony was not lost on her. She thought of Decker Lawson waiting for her in Las Animas, unaware that she might never arrive. Would he think she had changed her mind? Would he be disappointed or relieved? The stagecoach shuddered to a halt, and she could hear the horses screaming in protest against the cold. The driver appeared at the door, his face red and raw from the wind. "Miss, I am sorry, but we must abandon the coach. There is a ranch house not far from here if we can reach it on foot. The horses cannot go further and we will die if we stay here." Brianna nodded, her teeth chattering too hard to speak. She grabbed her small carpetbag, the only luggage she owned in the world, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit her like a physical blow, knocking her backward into the side of the coach. The driver caught her arm and pulled her forward, and together they struggled through snow that was already knee-deep and rising fast. She lost track of time in the white hell of the blizzard. Her feet went numb first, then her hands, then her face, until she felt like she was moving through a dream, detached from her own body. The driver kept pulling her forward, and she focused on putting one foot in front of the other, again and again, because the alternative was to lie down in the snow and never get up. When the dark shape of a building finally emerged from the whiteness, she thought at first that she was hallucinating. But the driver let out a hoarse shout of triumph and dragged her toward it with renewed strength. It was a barn, large and sturdy, and he pulled open the door with difficulty, shoving her inside before following and slamming it shut against the wind. The silence inside was almost shocking after the constant roar of the storm. Brianna collapsed onto the hay-strewn floor, gasping for breath, her lungs burning from the cold air. The barn was dark except for thin strips of gray light that filtered through the cracks in the walls, but it was warmer than outside, and she could smell horses and hay and the rich scent of manure that meant life and shelter. "Stay here," the driver said, his voice rough. "I will find the house and bring help." Before Brianna could protest, he was gone, slipping back out into the storm. She lay on the floor for a long moment, trying to gather her strength, then slowly sat up and looked around. There were several horses in the stalls, their dark eyes watching her with curiosity. At the far end of the barn, she could see the shape of a cow and what looked like chickens roosting in the rafters. She pulled herself to her feet and stumbled toward the horses, drawn by their warmth. One of them, a large bay gelding, nickered softly and stretched his nose toward her. She reached out with trembling fingers to touch his soft muzzle, and tears suddenly filled her eyes. She had made it. She was alive. Whatever happened next, she had survived the journey west. The barn door burst open with a crash that made her jump, and a man strode in, followed by the stagecoach driver. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in heavy sheepskin coat and worn leather gloves, his hat crusted with snow. He stopped when he saw her, and even in the dim light, she could see his eyes widen with surprise. "Good Lord," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough. "You are half frozen. Come to the house immediately." Brianna wanted to move, but her legs would not cooperate. She swayed on her feet, and suddenly the man was there, catching her before she fell. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against his chest, and she was too exhausted to protest. Through her coat, she could feel the solid warmth of him, and she instinctively pressed closer, seeking heat. He carried her out of the barn and through the storm, moving with the sure-footed confidence of someone who knew this land intimately. The house appeared quickly, a solid structure of logs and stone that seemed to squat defiantly against the wind. He kicked the door open and brought her inside, and the warmth hit her like a wall, so intense after the cold that it was almost painful. "Set her by the fire," a woman's voice said, and Brianna looked up to see an older woman with silver-streaked hair hurrying toward them. "The poor thing looks half dead. What was that fool driver thinking, traveling in this weather?" "The storm came up fast, Mrs. Chen," the man said as he set Brianna carefully in a rocking chair near the massive stone fireplace. They had no warning. Mrs. Chen was already pulling off Brianna's wet coat and shoes, clucking her tongue at the sight of her thin dress and inadequate stockings. "You will catch your death, girl." "How far did you travel in this?" "I do not know," Brianna managed to say through chattering teeth. "The driver said we were close to Las Animas." The man, who had been helping the driver with his coat, turned sharply. "Las Animas? That is still 15 miles south. You would never have made it in this storm." Brianna felt tears prick her eyes again, this time from frustration and exhaustion. "I was supposed to arrive today. Someone is expecting me." "Who?" the man asked, moving closer. Now that her eyes were adjusting to the light, she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, the color of storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Decker Lawson," she said, and watched something flicker across his face. "I am his mail-order bride." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackle of the fire. Mrs. Chen had frozen in the act of wrapping a blanket around Brianna's shoulders, and the stagecoach driver coughed awkwardly. The man stared at her for a long moment, and then, to her complete shock, His face broke into a slow smile that transformed his stern features into something almost boyish. "I am Decker Lawson," he said softly. "And you must be Brianna Thompson. The storm brought me a blessing." Brianna felt her heart lurch in her chest. This was her intended husband, the man whose letters she had read and reread until she had them memorized. In his letters, he had described himself as plain and rough, a simple rancher with little to recommend him beyond honesty and hard work. He had not mentioned that he was handsome, or that his smile could make her feel warm all the way through despite the chill that still clung to her bones. "I am sorry I did not arrive as planned," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did not mean to cause trouble." Trouble. Decker moved closer and knelt beside her chair so that their eyes were level. "You traveled 2,000 miles to be here, through one of the worst blizzards I have seen in years, and you apologize for being late. Miss Thompson, you are either the bravest woman I have ever met or the most foolish, and right now I am too grateful that you are alive to care which." His words, spoken with such sincerity, made something tight in her chest loosen. She had been so afraid that he would be disappointed, that the reality of her would not match whatever expectations he had built from her letters. But there was no disappointment in his eyes, only relief and something else she could not quite name. "You need hot food and dry clothes, Mrs. Chen said briskly, breaking the moment. "Come with me, child. Mr. Lawson, you see to that driver and make sure the horses are secure in the barn." Decker stood and stepped back, though his gaze lingered on Brianna. "Mrs. Chen will take good care of you. We will talk more once you have rested." Brianna allowed the older woman to help her to her feet and guide her toward a bedroom at the back of the house. Her legs felt weak and unsteady, but Mrs. Chen kept a firm grip on her arm. The bedroom was small but comfortable, with a thick quilt on the bed and curtains at the window. Mrs. Chen helped her out of her wet clothes and into a warm nightgown that must have belonged to someone else, then tucked her into bed with heated stones wrapped in flannel at her feet. "Sleep now," Mrs. Chen said gently, smoothing the hair back from Brianna's forehead. "The storm will pass, and there will be time enough for everything else." Brianna wanted to ask questions, wanted to know more about Decker and this house and what her life here would be like, but exhaustion dragged at her like an anchor. Her eyes closed despite her best efforts to keep them open, and she sank into sleep with the sound of the wind howling outside the window. When she woke, the light coming through the curtains was thin and gray, and for a moment she could not remember where she was. Then memory flooded back, and she sat up quickly, her heart pounding. How long had she slept? Was it still the same day, or had a night passed? There were clothes laid out on a chair near the bed, a simple dress of dark blue wool that looked warm and practical. Brianna dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. Her body ached from the ordeal of the previous day, but the bone-deep chill was gone, replaced by a restless energy. She needed to see Decker again, needed to understand what happened next. The house was quiet when she emerged from the bedroom. The main room was dominated by the large fireplace, which was burning low but steady. There was a kitchen area to one side, with a cast iron stove and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. The furniture was simple but well made, clearly built to last through hard use. On the wall, she could see a rifle and a pair of snowshoes, practical tools for survival in this harsh land. "You are awake." Decker's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway, his hat in his hands. Snow dusted his shoulders and his cheeks were red from the cold. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Brianna said, suddenly shy. In the clear light of day, or what passed for day during the storm, she was acutely aware of how strange this situation was. This man was her intended husband, but they were complete strangers. Is the storm still raging? Not as badly as yesterday, but it has not stopped. The stagecoach driver left this morning during a break in the weather. He said he would send word to Las Animas that you arrived safely, but I doubt anyone will be able to travel for several days at least. He paused, turning his hat in his hands. I hope you do not mind staying here. I know this is not what you expected. I expected to marry you, Brianna said, surprised by her own boldness. Does it matter so much where that happens? Decker's eyes met hers, and she saw surprise there and something warmer. I suppose it does not. But I thought you might want time to get to know me first, to be sure this is what you want. My letters could not tell you everything about me or about life here. It is hard and lonely sometimes, especially in winter. You might decide you want to return east. Brianna crossed the room to stand before him, drawing on reserves of courage she had not known she possessed. Mr. Lawson, I sold everything I owned to buy a train ticket west. I left behind a city where I knew every street corner, where I had friends and familiar places, because I wanted something more than spending my entire life cleaning other people's houses and wondering if I would ever have a home of my own. I did not come all this way to turn back at the first difficulty. A slow smile spread across his face. Decker, please call me Decker, and I am glad to hear you say that, Brianna. May I call you Brianna? I would prefer it, she said, and found herself smiling back at him. There was something about his presence that made her feel steadier, more certain of herself. Perhaps it was the way he looked at her, as if she were something valuable and rare, or perhaps it was simply that he seemed so solidly grounded in this place, so completely at home. Are you hungry? He asked. Mrs. Chen left soup on the stove before she went to check on the animals. She lives in the small cabin behind the house with her husband, Huang. They have worked for me for 5 years now, and I could not manage without them. I am starving, Brianna admitted. Now that he mentioned it, she realized she could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. Decker led her to the table and ladled soup into bowls, thick with vegetables and chunks of beef. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Brianna savored every bite. The soup was rich and warming, the best thing she had tasted in weeks. Tell me about yourself, Decker said finally. Your letters told me the facts, but I want to know more. What made you decide to answer my advertisement? Brianna set down her spoon and considered the question. Desperation, at first, she said honestly. I was working at a boarding house in Philadelphia, and the owner was a cruel woman who paid almost nothing and expected us to be grateful for it. But it was more than that. I felt like I was trapped in a life that would never change, never get better. I would work until I was too old and sick to continue, and then I would die alone in some charity hospital. When I read your advertisement, I saw a chance for something different, a chance to build a life instead of just surviving one. Decker nodded slowly. I understand that feeling. I came west 10 years ago for much the same reason. My family back in Ohio wanted me to work in my father's store, to marry the daughter of his business partner and live the same life he lived. But I wanted land of my own, space to breathe, a chance to build something with my own hands. Do you regret it? Brianna asked. Leaving your family? Sometimes, he admitted. Especially during the first few winters when I was alone and wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But I look at what I have built here and I know it was the right choice. This ranch, small as it is, belongs to me. No one can take it away or tell me what to do with it. That freedom is worth more than comfort. Brianna felt a kinship with him that went deeper than their brief acquaintance. They were both people who had chosen uncertainty over the safe misery of a life they did not want. What happened to your wife? She asked gently. You mentioned in one of your letters that you had been married before. Decker's face grew somber. Margaret died 3 years ago in childbirth. The baby died too, a little girl. It was the middle of winter and the doctor could not get through the snow in time. He paused, staring into his soup. I blamed myself for a long time. If I had not brought her here, if we had stayed in town instead of building the ranch so far from help, maybe they would have lived. You cannot know that, Brianna said softly. Women die in childbirth in cities too, with doctors nearby. It is a risk we all take. I know that now, Decker said. But it took me a long time to accept it. Mrs. Chen helped me through the worst of it. She and Huang had lost their own daughter years ago, and she understood the grief. He looked up at Brianna, his eyes searching her face. I want to be honest with you. I loved Margaret, and part of me will always grieve for her and our daughter, but I am ready to move forward now to build a new life. I hope that does not trouble you. It does not, Brianna assured him. I would worry more if you felt nothing for them. It speaks well of your character that you loved your wife and mourn her still. She hesitated, then added, My own past is not complicated by romance. I have never been in love, never been courted properly. I was too busy trying to survive to think much about such things. Then we will learn together, Decker said, and reached across the table to take her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, his fingers strong and warm around hers. I want us to be partners, Brianna. Not just husband and wife in name, but true partners who work together and trust each other. That is what I am offering, if you will have it. Brianna looked down at their joined hands and felt something shift inside her, like a door opening onto possibilities she had not dared to imagine. I will have it, she said quietly. I will have you and this life, and whatever comes with it. Decker squeezed her hand gently, then released it and stood. The storm should break by tomorrow. When it does, I will ride to Las Animas and speak with the preacher. We can be married as soon as you wish, unless you want to wait longer. I do not want to wait, Brianna said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. I did not come here to play games or test the waters. I came here to marry you, and I see no reason to delay. His smile was brilliant, transforming his face. Then we will be married within the week. In the meantime, you should rest and regain your strength. The house is yours to explore. Make yourself at home. Over the next 3 days, as the storm gradually wore itself out, Brianna did exactly that. She learned the layout of the house, which was larger than it had first appeared. Besides the main room with its fireplace and kitchen, there were 2 bedrooms, a small washroom, and a storage area packed with supplies. Decker had built it all himself with help from Huang, and she could see the care that had gone into every detail. The doors hung straight, the windows were tight against drafts, and the roof did not leak even under the assault of heavy snow. Mrs. Chen became her guide and teacher, showing her where things were kept and explaining the routines of the household. The older woman was brusque but kind, and Brianna soon learned that beneath her stern exterior was a deep well of warmth. Huang was quieter, a small man with weathered features and hands that moved with precise efficiency. He spoke little English, but his smiles were genuine, and he seemed pleased to have another person around. Decker was busy with the animals, making sure they were fed and watered despite the storm, but he made time to eat meals with Brianna and talk with her in the evenings. They sat by the fire and shared stories, learning the small details of each other's lives. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, the daughter of Irish immigrants who had died of fever when she was 15, leaving her alone in a city that had no mercy for orphans. He told her about his childhood in Ohio, about brothers and sisters she might someday meet, about the restlessness that had driven him west, and the peace he had found in this harsh land. With each conversation, Brianna felt the strangeness between them dissolve. Decker was not a man of flowery words or grand gestures, but his honesty was refreshing. He told her the truth about ranch life, the back-breaking work and long hours, the times when money was tight and the future uncertain. But he also told her about the beauty of watching the sunrise over the mountains, the satisfaction of seeing the herd grow each year, the fierce pride of knowing that he was beholden to no one. "I will not lie and say it is easy," he told her on the third night as they sat together watching the fire burn low. "There are days when everything goes wrong, when the cattle break through a fence or a horse comes up lame or the creek floods and washes out part of the pasture. But those hard days make the good ones sweeter, and having someone to share it with, both the struggles and the victories, that makes all the difference." "I am not afraid of hard work," Brianna said. "I have worked hard my entire life. But I was working for other people's benefit, making other people comfortable while I barely scraped by. Here, if I work hard, it will be for us, for our home and our future. That makes it worthwhile." Decker looked at her with such warmth that she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You are remarkable," he said softly. "I knew it from your letters, but seeing you here, talking with you like this, I realize I got far luckier than I deserved. Any man would be proud to call you his wife." Brianna did not know how to respond to such praise. She had never thought of herself as remarkable, only as someone trying to survive in a world that seemed determined to grind her down. But the way Decker looked at her made her want to believe it, made her want to be the woman he saw when he looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. On the fourth morning, she woke to silence. The constant howl of the wind had stopped, and bright sunlight streamed through the window, so dazzling after days of gray that it hurt her eyes. She dressed quickly and rushed to the main room to find Decker already up, pulling on his heavy coat. "The storm has passed," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "I am riding to Las Animas today to arrange for the wedding. Mrs. Chen will stay with you. I should be back by evening if the roads are passable." "Be careful," Brianna said, and was surprised by the strength of her concern. The thought of something happening to him on the journey made her chest tighten with worry. Decker crossed to her and took both her hands in his. "I will be careful," he promised. "I have too much to come back to now to take foolish risks." He hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was the first time he had touched her so intimately, and the contact sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. He left shortly after, and Brianna watched from the window as he rode away on the big bay gelding she had seen in the barn that first night. The world outside was buried in snow, the landscape transformed into something alien and beautiful. The mountains in the distance gleamed white against a sky so blue it seemed unreal. Mrs. Chen found her standing there and touched her shoulder gently. "He is a good man," the older woman said. "He will make you happy, I think, and you will be good for him. He has been alone too long, carrying his grief like a stone. You will help him learn to smile again." "I hope so," Brianna said. "I want to make him happy. I want this to be a real marriage, not just an arrangement." "It will be what you make of it," Mrs. Chen said wisely. "Marriage is work, like everything else worth having. But the two of you, I think you are well matched. You both know what it is to struggle and to endure. That gives you a strong foundation." The day passed slowly. Brianna helped Mrs. Chen with the household tasks, learning how to make bread in the cast iron Dutch oven and how to properly clean and care for the lamp chimneys. She went out to the barn with Huang to help feed the animals, marveling at the way the horses nickered and pushed their noses against her hands, searching for treats. There were 24 cattle in a sheltered corral behind the barn, sturdy beasts with shaggy coats, and Huang explained through gestures, and the few English words he knew that they would be moved to the high pastures come spring. As the sun began to set, painting the snow orange and pink, Brianna found herself watching the road anxiously. What if Decker had run into trouble? What if the snow was deeper than he expected, or his horse had stumbled, or 100 other disasters had befallen him? She had only known him for a few days, but already the thought of losing him filled her with a dread that surprised her with its intensity. But just as the light was fading, she saw a dark shape moving along the road, and relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees went weak. Decker rode into the yard and dismounted, and Brianna rushed out to meet him, not bothering with her coat despite the cold. "You are back," she said breathlessly, and then felt foolish for stating the obvious. Decker grinned at her, his face ruddy from the cold and the ride. "I promised I would be. And I bring good news. The preacher will come here in 2 days to perform the ceremony. I invited a few neighbors as well, so you will have witnesses and a proper celebration. I hope that is all right." "It is more than all right," Brianna said. "Thank you." She wanted to say more, wanted to tell him how worried she had been, but the words stuck in her throat. Decker seemed to understand anyway. He reached out and touched her cheek gently, his thumb brushing against her skin. "I will always come back to you," he said softly. "You can trust that." The next 2 days passed in a flurry of preparation. Mrs. Chen threw herself into cooking with fierce determination, preparing dishes that filled the house with mouth-watering aromas. Brianna helped as best she could, learning recipes and techniques that were new to her. Huang cleaned the barn and made sure there was plenty of feed for the neighbors' horses. Decker split firewood and made sure the house was in perfect order, his nervous energy evident in every movement. On the morning of the wedding, Brianna woke before dawn, too excited to sleep. Mrs. Chen had altered one of Margaret's old dresses for her, a beautiful gown of cream-colored silk that must have been brought from the East at great expense. Brianna had protested at first, uncomfortable with wearing a dead woman's clothes, but Mrs. Chen had insisted. "She would want you to have it," the older woman had said firmly. She was a generous soul, and she would be happy to know that Mr. Lawson had found someone new to love. Do not dishonor her memory by refusing. Now, as Mrs. Chen helped her into the dress, Brianna sent a silent prayer of thanks to the woman she had never met. The dress fit perfectly, and when she looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked elegant, refined, nothing like the exhausted girl who had stumbled into the barn 4 days ago. The guests began arriving in late morning. First came the Hendersons, a family of homesteaders from a few miles south. Tom Henderson was a burly man with a booming laugh, and his wife Sarah was small and pretty with a kind smile. They had 3 children who raced around the yard, delighting in the snow. Then came old Jonas Pike, a grizzled prospector who lived alone in the mountains and only came down to trade a few times a year. He brought Brianna a small nugget of gold as a wedding present, pressing it into her hand with a gap-toothed grin. The last to arrive was the preacher, Reverend Martin, a thin man with earnest eyes who had traveled from Las Animas despite the difficult conditions. He greeted everyone warmly and then asked to speak with Brianna and Decker privately. In the quiet of Decker's bedroom, the preacher looked at them both seriously. "I want to make sure you understand what you are undertaking," he said. "Marriage is a sacred bond not to be entered into lightly. Have you both prayed and considered this carefully?" "I have," Decker said firmly. "I know my own mind, and I know what I want. I want Brianna as my wife to have and to hold from this day forward." "And you, Miss Thompson?" the preacher asked. Brianna met Decker's eyes and saw the hope and vulnerability there. This strong, capable man who had built a life from nothing in this wilderness was trusting her with his future, with his heart. "I have considered it," she said clearly, And I am certain I want to be Decker's wife to build a life with him here." The preacher smiled. "Then let us proceed." They gathered in the main room, with the fire burning brightly and everyone crowded together. Brianna stood beside Decker, acutely aware of his presence, of the way his hand trembled slightly when he took hers. The preacher began to speak, his voice solemn and sure, and Brianna tried to focus on the words, on the vows she was making, but she found herself distracted by Decker's face. He was looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, as if he could not quite believe his good fortune. When it came time for him to say his vows, his voice was rough with emotion. "I, Decker Lawson, take you, Brianna Thompson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to honor you, to protect you, to work beside you and support you in all things. I promise to be faithful to you, to respect your thoughts and opinions, to value your partnership above all else. This I swear before God and these witnesses." Then it was Brianna's turn, and she spoke the words that would bind her life to his. "I, Brianna Thompson, take you, Decker Lawson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand by you in times of hardship and times of plenty, to be your companion and your partner, to work beside you to build a good life together. I promise to be faithful and true, to honor the trust you have placed in me. This I swear before God and these witnesses." Decker produced a simple gold band, worn smooth with age, and slipped it onto her finger. "This was my grandmother's ring," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "She told me to save it for a woman I could truly love. I think she would approve of you." Tears pricked Brianna's eyes as the preacher pronounced them man and wife. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Martin said with a smile. Decker cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her, a soft, sweet kiss that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Around them, the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause, but Brianna barely heard them. All she could focus on was Decker, on the feel of his lips against hers, on the promise of the life they would build together. The celebration that followed was joyous and chaotic. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with the food, and the house filled with laughter and conversation. Sarah Henderson pulled Brianna aside to welcome her to the area and promised to visit soon. Jonas Pike entertained the children with tall tales of his prospecting adventures. Tom Henderson and Decker discussed cattle prices and the prospects for the coming year. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Brianna found herself growing nervous. She was married now, truly and legally bound to Decker Lawson, and tonight would be their wedding night. She had only the vaguest idea of what that entailed, gleaned from whispered conversations among the other girls at the boarding house. But she knew it was significant. After the last guest had gone and Mrs. Chen and Huang had retired to their cabin, Brianna and Decker were left alone. The house seemed very quiet suddenly, and Brianna busied herself clearing dishes, unsure what to do or say. "Leave those," Decker said softly, taking a plate from her hands and setting it down. "They can wait until morning." "I do not mind," Brianna said quickly. "I want to be useful." Decker smiled and took her hands, drawing her away from the table. "You are my wife now, not a servant. Come, sit with me." He led her to the rocking chair by the fire, then surprised her by sitting down and pulling her onto his lap. She stiffened, uncertain, but he wrapped his arms around her loosely, not constraining her. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked gently. "No," Brianna said, and realized it was true. "I am afraid of disappointing you. I do not know how to be a wife, Decker. I do not know what you expect of me." "I expect you to be yourself," he said firmly. "That is all I have ever wanted. As for the rest, we will learn together." He paused, then added carefully, "I know it is our wedding night and there are certain expectations, but I want you to know that I will not force anything upon you." We have time, Brianna. If you need to wait to feel more comfortable with me, I understand. His consideration touched her deeply. She had heard stories from other women about wedding nights, about husbands who were rough and demanding, who cared nothing for their wives' feelings. Decker was offering her something precious, patience and respect. "I do not want to wait," she said softly. "I am nervous, yes, but I trust you. I want us to be truly married in every way." Decker's eyes darkened, and he lifted one hand to cup her cheek. "Then we will go slowly," he promised. "And if you change your mind at any point, you need only say so." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Brianna felt heat unfurl in her belly. His hands moved to her hair, pulling out the pins Mrs. Chen had so carefully arranged that morning, letting the dark waves fall around her shoulders. He threaded his fingers through it, murmuring something about how beautiful it was, and Brianna relaxed against him, letting herself feel the pleasure of his touch. What followed was tender and careful, Decker true to his word about going slowly. He carried her to his bedroom, which was now their bedroom, and undressed her with gentle hands, murmuring reassurances when she trembled. He showed her with touches and kisses that there was nothing to fear, that this could be sweet and good between them. And when they finally came together fully as husband and wife, Brianna felt something click into place inside her, as if she had been incomplete her whole life without knowing it. Afterward, she lay in Decker's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, his fingers trailing lazily through her hair. "For being patient with me, for being kind, for being you." Decker pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "The storm brought me a blessing," he said quietly. "When I saw you standing in my barn, half frozen but still standing, I knew you were strong enough for this life. But I did not know then how much I would come to care for you. I think I am falling in love with you, Brianna Lawson." Her breath caught. It was too soon, surely, to feel what she was feeling. They barely knew each other, but her heart did not care about logic or sensible timelines. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she admitted. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, warm and safe while outside the winter wind whispered around the house. The months that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery. Winter loosened its grip gradually, and Brianna learned the rhythms of ranch life. She woke before dawn to help Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for the men. She learned to milk the cow and collect eggs from the chickens, to churn butter and preserve vegetables. She learned to recognize the signs of a coming storm and how to secure the animals before it hit. Decker was a patient teacher, showing her how to ride a horse properly, how to mend a fence, how to doctor a calf that was sick or injured. He treated her as a true partner, asking her opinion on decisions about the ranch and listening seriously to her answers. At night, they lay together in their bed and talked about the future, about the improvements they wanted to make to the ranch, about the family they hoped to have someday. As spring arrived and the snow began to melt, revealing the brown grass beneath, Decker grew busy with the work of the season. The cattle had to be moved to the high pastures, fences needed repair after the winter, and there was a new field to plow for planting oats. Brianna threw herself into the work alongside him, ignoring Mrs. Chen's protests that she should save her strength. "I did not come here to be a delicate flower," Brianna told the older woman firmly. "I came here to be a rancher's wife, and that means working." But by early May, she had to admit that something was wrong. She was exhausted all the time, and certain smells made her stomach turn. When she could not keep down breakfast 3 mornings in a row, Mrs. Chen took one look at her pale face and knowing smile. "You are with child," the older woman said matter-of-factly. Brianna stared at her. "Are you certain?" "Very certain. I have seen it enough times to recognize the signs." You should tell Mr. Lawson. But Brianna hesitated. The memory of Margaret's death in childbirth hung over the house like a ghost. How could she tell Decker that she was pregnant when his first wife and child had died that way? What if history repeated itself? What if she brought him more grief instead of joy? She tried to hide it, but Decker noticed something was wrong within a few days. He cornered her in the barn one afternoon while she was feeding the horses. "What is troubling you?" he asked directly. "You have been distant lately and you barely eat. Are you unhappy? Do you regret marrying me?" "No," Brianna said quickly. "I could never regret that. I am happier here than I have ever been in my life." "Then what is it?" He took her hands, his brow furrowed with worry. "Please, Brianna, talk to me. We promised to be partners, to share everything." She took a deep breath. "I am pregnant," she said quietly. The color drained from Decker's face. For a long moment he simply stared at her, and Brianna felt her heart sink. This was what she had feared, that the news would bring back all his pain. But then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice rough. "We are going to have a baby." "I know you are afraid," Brianna said against his chest. "I am afraid too, but women have babies every day and survive. We will be careful and we will make sure I have the best care possible." Decker pulled back to look at her, and she was shocked to see tears in his eyes. "I am afraid," he admitted. "I would be lying if I said otherwise. But I am also so happy I can barely think straight. You have given me a second chance, Brianna, at everything. At love, at family, at hope. I will not let fear steal that from us." He insisted on bringing a doctor from Las Animas to examine her, despite the expense. Dr. Harrison was a gruff, competent man who pronounced Brianna healthy and told her the baby would likely arrive in early December. He gave her instructions about what to eat and how much rest to take, and told Decker sternly that he was to make sure she did not overwork herself. "Your wife is young and strong," the doctor said. "There is no reason to expect complications, but she needs proper care and no undue stress." Decker took the doctor's words seriously, perhaps too seriously. He tried to stop Brianna from doing any work at all, insisting that Mrs. Chen could handle everything. Brianna tolerated this for about a week before she finally lost her temper. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she told him sharply. "I need to stay active and useful, or I will go mad sitting around doing nothing." They compromised, with Brianna agreeing to avoid the heaviest work but still helping with cooking, mending, and the lighter chores. As her belly began to swell with the baby, she found herself filled with a sense of wonder. She was creating a life, growing a person inside her body. It seemed impossible and miraculous at the same time. The summer passed in golden warmth. Brianna planted a vegetable garden near the house and tended it carefully, delighting in watching the plants grow. Sarah Henderson visited regularly, bringing her children and her own stories of pregnancy and motherhood. The two women became close friends, and Sarah's easy laughter and practical advice helped ease Brianna's fears. In August, Decker surprised her by building a cradle, spending hours in the barn carefully crafting each piece and fitting them together. When he brought it into the house and set it beside their bed, Brianna burst into tears at the sight of it. "It is beautiful," she managed to say through her crying. "You made this for our baby." "I wanted to make something that would last," Decker said, looking pleased and slightly embarrassed by her reaction. "Something our child could use and maybe their children someday." As autumn arrived and the leaves turned gold on the aspens, Brianna grew larger and more uncomfortable. The baby seemed to press on every organ in her body, making it hard to breathe and impossible to sleep for more than a few hours at a time. But every time she felt the baby kick and move inside her, every time Decker placed his hand on her belly and smiled with wonder, She knew it was all worth it. By November, she could barely move without help. Decker had sent word to Dr. Harrison to be prepared to come quickly when the time came, and Mrs. Chen had laid in supplies for the birth. Everything was ready, but the waiting was interminable. The first snow of the season fell in late November, a light dusting that reminded Brianna of her arrival almost exactly a year ago. She stood at the window, watching the flakes drift down, and marveled at how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been a desperate girl with nothing but hope and determination. Now she was a wife, soon to be a mother, with a home and a husband who loved her, and a future that stretched out bright and full of promise. "What are you thinking about?" Decker asked, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms carefully around her swollen belly. "How happy I am," Brianna said simply. "How grateful I am that the storm brought me to you." "The storm brought us both blessings," Decker murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. The labor pains began 2 weeks later, in the early hours of a cold December morning. Brianna woke Decker immediately, trying to stay calm despite her fear. He sent Huang racing to Las Animas to fetch the doctor, then helped Brianna back to bed. Mrs. Chen took charge with brisk efficiency, boiling water and laying out clean linens, her presence steady and reassuring. The labor was long and difficult. As the hours stretched on and the pain intensified, Brianna understood with terrible clarity why women died in childbirth. This was harder than anything she had ever endured, worse than the worst day of work at the boarding house, worse than the journey through the blizzard. There were moments when she wanted to give up, when she thought she could not possibly continue. But Decker stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand and wiping the sweat from her face. He spoke to her constantly, telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her, how much he loved her. His presence anchored her, gave her something to focus on besides the pain. Dr. Harrison arrived in late afternoon, examining her quickly and nodding with satisfaction. "You are doing well," he told her. "It should not be much longer now." He was right. As the sun was setting, painting the snow outside orange and pink, Brianna gave one final push and felt the baby slip free. For a moment there was silence, and terror clutched at her heart. But then the baby let out a lusty wail, and Dr. Harrison laughed. "You have a son," he announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A big, healthy boy." Mrs. Chen took the baby to clean him while Dr. Harrison tended to Brianna. She felt exhausted beyond words, wrung out and empty but also exhilarated. She had done it. She had survived. They had a son when Mrs. Chen brought the baby to her, wrapped in a soft blanket. Brianna looked down at his red, wrinkled face and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one. We have been waiting for you." Decker stood beside the bed, staring at his son with an expression of awe. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "You are perfect. Thank you, Brianna. Thank you for this gift." They named him David after Decker's grandfather, with the middle name of Thomas after Brianna's father. David Lawson was loud and demanding from the start, keeping them awake at all hours with his crying. But Brianna did not mind the sleepless nights or the constant demands. Every time she nursed him, every time she changed his diaper or soothed him to sleep, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude that she had this life, this family. Decker proved to be a devoted father. He helped with the baby whenever he could, walking the floor with David when he was fussy, changing him without complaint, staring at him for long minutes as if he could not quite believe he was real. The fear that had haunted him during the pregnancy seemed to have melted away, replaced by fierce protectiveness and joy. Christmas that year was quiet but happy. Mrs. Chen cooked a feast, and they invited the Hendersons to share it with them. The house filled with the sound of children laughing and adults talking, and Brianna held David close and thought that she had never been so content. As the years passed, their family grew. David was joined by a daughter, Emma, when he was 2 years old, and then another son, James, 2 years after that. The ranch grew too, as Decker bought more cattle and expanded the pastures. They built a larger barn and added another room to the house. Huang and Mrs. Chen remained with them, growing older but no less essential to the functioning of the household. Life was not always easy. There were years when drought killed the grass and they had to sell part of the herd. There were illnesses and injuries, broken bones and fevers that terrified them. There were arguments and misunderstandings, the inevitable friction of two strong-willed people building a life together. But through it all, the love between Brianna and Decker deepened and matured. They learned each other's moods and habits, learned when to push and when to give space, learned the 1,000 small compromises that make a marriage work. They laughed together and cried together and worked together, partners in every sense of the word. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Decker surprised Brianna with a trip to Las Animas. They left the children with Mrs. Chen and rode to town together, the first time they had been alone together in months. Decker took her to the hotel and rented a room, and they spent the evening eating dinner and talking without interruption, a luxury they rarely enjoyed anymore. Later, lying in the hotel bed with Decker's arms around her, Brianna thought back to the frightened girl who had arrived in a blizzard 10 years ago. That girl could never have imagined the life she had now, the richness and fullness of it. "What are you thinking about?" Decker asked sleepily. "How much I love you," Brianna said. "How grateful I am for everything we have built together." "I am the grateful one," Decker said, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "You took a chance on a lonely rancher with nothing but a dream and hard work to offer. You gave me a family, Brianna. You gave me everything." They stayed awake late into the night, talking and holding each other, reconnecting in the way that busy parents often struggle to do. And when they returned to the ranch the next day, they came back renewed, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. As the children grew, Brianna took pride in teaching them herself, using the education she had received back in Philadelphia. She ordered books from catalogs and set up a small schoolroom in the house, determined that her children would be able to read and write and figure properly. Decker supported her fully, insisting that education was just as important as learning to work the ranch. David grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet determination and steady hands. Emma inherited Brianna's dark hair and quick wit, forever asking questions and demanding explanations. James was the cheerful one, always laughing, always ready to turn even the hardest work into a game. When David turned 16, Decker began teaching him seriously about running the ranch, taking him to cattle auctions and letting him make decisions about breeding and selling. "This will all be yours someday," Decker told his son. "You need to know every aspect of it." Brianna watched her eldest son grow into a man and felt the bittersweet ache of time passing too quickly. Where had the years gone? It seemed like only yesterday that she had held him as a newborn, and now he was almost as tall as his father, his voice deep and sure. Emma announced at 15 that she wanted to be a teacher, and Brianna worked with her to prepare for the exam that would allow her to teach in a one-room schoolhouse. James talked about becoming a doctor, inspired by Dr. Harrison's visits over the years. Brianna and Decker encouraged all their children's dreams while making sure they understood the value of hard work and perseverance. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep when Brianna was 38, and they buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch. Huang grieved quietly but deeply, and though he stayed on to help with the work, He was never quite the same without his wife. He died 2 years later, and they buried him beside Mrs. Chen, two people who had been as much family as employees. Their loss reminded Brianna that time was precious and finite. She made sure to tell Decker every day that she loved him. She spent time with each of her children individually, learning their hopes and fears. She wrote letters to Decker's family back in Ohio, maintaining connections even across the distance. And she thanked God every night for the life she had been given, for the second chance that had come to her in the midst of a blizzard. When Brianna turned 40, Decker organized a surprise party, inviting everyone they knew from miles around. The house and barn overflowed with people, neighbors and friends who had become like family over the years. Sarah Henderson was there with her grown children, Jonas Pike surprisingly still alive and cantankerous as ever, and dozens of others whose lives had intersected with theirs over the years. As Brianna stood in the midst of the celebration, watching her husband laugh with Tom Henderson and her children serving food to the guests, she felt a profound sense of peace. This was what she had dreamed of all those years ago when she had answered Decker's advertisement. A home, a family, a place where she belonged. She had found all that and so much more. David married at 20, bringing home a sweet-faced girl named Lucy from a neighboring ranch. Within a year, Brianna became a grandmother, holding David's son in her arms and marveling at the circle of life. Emma went off to teach at a school in Denver but came home every summer, full of stories about her students and the city. James did indeed go to medical school, and though it meant being apart from him for long stretches, Brianna and Decker were fiercely proud of his accomplishments. As they grew older, Decker's hair turned silver and lines deepened around his eyes, but to Brianna, he was as handsome as ever. Her own hair showed streaks of gray, and her hands bore the marks of decades of hard work, but she wore those signs of age with pride. They had earned every year, every gray hair, every wrinkle through honest labor and steadfast love. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. All three were there, David with his wife and 3 children, Emma with a young rancher she had met named Michael, and James home from his medical residency. The house rang with laughter and conversation, and Brianna looked around at the family they had created and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. That evening, after the guests had gone and the children had settled in their old rooms, Brianna and Decker sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool mountain air. The stars blazed overhead, impossibly bright and clear. "You remember the night I arrived?" Brianna asked. "When you carried me into the house from the barn?" "I remember everything about that night," Decker said. "I remember thinking I had never seen anyone so brave or so stubborn, still standing after what you had been through. I remember being terrified that you would take one look at me and my life and run back to Philadelphia as fast as you could." "I remember being terrified too," Brianna admitted. "But I also remember feeling safe when you held me. Like I had finally found what I had been searching for without knowing it." Decker pulled her closer. "The storm brought me a blessing," he said, repeating the words he had spoken that first night. "The greatest blessing of my life. We blessed each other," Brianna said softly. "We built this life together, this family, this home. Neither of us could have done it alone." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. After a while, they heard the soft sound of the children settling in for the night, the familiar creaks and sounds of the house they had shared for so many years. And Brianna thought about how strange and wonderful life was, how a single decision to answer an advertisement had led to all of this, to decades of love and work and family. The winters came and went, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. When Brianna was 50, Decker developed a persistent cough that worried her. James, now a practicing physician, came home to examine his father and prescribed rest and medicine. The cough eventually cleared, but Brianna found herself watching Decker more carefully after that, acutely aware of their mortality. But Decker seemed determined to keep going strong. He still worked the ranch every day, though he relied more on David and the hired hands now. He played with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope just as he had taught his own children. And every night, he came to bed and held Brianna close, his love as steady and sure as it had been on their wedding night. Emma married her rancher in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch when Brianna was 52. Watching her daughter exchange vows reminded Brianna so vividly of her own wedding day that she found herself crying happy tears. Emma and Michael settled on a ranch 50 miles west, close enough to visit but far enough to build their own life. James surprised them all by falling in love with a nurse at the hospital where he worked. He brought Catherine home to meet the family, and Brianna loved her immediately. Catherine was practical and kind, with a quick smile and steady hands. She fit into their family as if she had always been there. When Brianna turned 55, she woke one morning to find Decker already up, sitting in the rocking chair by the window and watching the sunrise. She went to him and saw that his face was thoughtful, almost sad. "What is wrong?" she asked, concerned. "Nothing is wrong," Decker said, pulling her onto his lap as he had done so many times over the years. "I was just thinking about time and how fast it passes. It feels like only yesterday that I carried you into this house during that blizzard, and now here we are, grandparents with more years behind us than ahead." "Are you sorry?" Brianna asked quietly. "Sorry?" Decker looked at her in surprise. "How could I possibly be sorry? These years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. I just wish we had more time. I wish I could hold onto every moment and make it last." Brianna cupped his face in her hands. "Then let us not waste a single moment we have left. Let us live every day fully, loving each other and our family and this life we have built." Decker kissed her, soft and sweet. "I love you, Brianna Lawson. I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing in my barn, and I will love you until I draw my last breath." "And I love you," Brianna said. "You gave me everything I never dared to dream of. You made me believe in second chances and new beginnings. You showed me that love does not have to be complicated or dramatic to be real and true." They sat together as the sun rose higher, painting the mountains gold and pink, and Brianna thought about the journey that had brought them here. So many years, so many moments both ordinary and extraordinary. The birth of their children, the death of friends, the slow accumulation of memories that made up a life. The ranch continued to thrive under David's increasingly skilled management. He had his father's steady temperament and his mother's quick intelligence, and he made decisions that grew the operation while staying true to the values his parents had instilled in him. His children were growing up strong and confident, the fourth generation to call this land home. Emma and Michael had 2 daughters and were expecting a 3rd child. Emma continued to teach, setting up a small school on their ranch for her own children and the children of neighboring families. James and Catherine had settled in Denver, where James had opened his own medical practice. They visited several times a year, and Catherine was pregnant with their first child. As Brianna approached 60, she found herself thinking more about legacy, about what she and Decker had built and what would remain after they were gone. The ranch would continue through David. The values they had taught their children would live on through them and their children in turn. But more than that, they had created something intangible but precious. A family bound by love and respect, people who knew how to work hard and stand together through difficulties. One evening, as they were sitting at the dinner table with David's family, the youngest grandchild, a boy of 6 named Matthew, asked Brianna how she and Grandpa had met. Brianna smiled and looked at Decker, who grinned back at her. "I arrived during a blizzard," she said. "The worst storm your grandfather had ever seen. I was supposed to arrive in Los Animas, but the stagecoach could not make it through the snow and the driver had to bring me here instead." "Were you scared?" Matthew asked, his eyes wide. "I was terrified," Brianna admitted. "I had traveled so far from home to marry a man I had never met, and I thought I might freeze to death before I ever got to meet him. But when your grandfather found me in his barn and brought me into the house, I knew everything would be all right." "Why?" Matthew pressed. Brianna thought about how to explain it to a child. "Because he looked at me like I was something precious, not a burden or an inconvenience. Because he was kind when he could have been angry about the trouble my arrival had caused. Because he said that the storm had brought him a blessing, and I could see that he meant it." Decker reached across the table to take her hand. "The storm did bring me a blessing," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The greatest blessing of my life. It brought me your grandmother, and through her, all of you. Every good thing in my life traces back to that snowy night when a brave woman stumbled into my barn." David's wife, Lucy, wiped tears from her eyes. David himself smiled and squeezed his father's shoulder. The children looked between their grandparents with the bemused incomprehension of the young, not yet able to fully understand the depth of what they were witnessing. But Brianna knew that someday they would understand. Someday they would be old enough to appreciate what a miracle it was that 2 strangers had found each other across a continent, had built a life and a family from nothing but determination and love. Someday they would tell their own children and grandchildren the story of how it all began, of the blizzard and the blessing. As winter approached once more, Brianna stood at the window watching the first snowflakes fall, just as she had done so many years before. Decker came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "You remember?" he asked softly. "I remember everything," Brianna said. "Every moment, every year, I would not change a single thing." "Not even the blizzard," Decker teased. "Especially not the blizzard," Brianna said firmly. "Without the blizzard, I might have arrived in Los Animas as planned, might have married you without ever really seeing you in your own element. But because of the storm, I saw immediately who you really were. A good man, a strong man, someone who could face adversity with grace and kindness. The storm tested us both, and we passed." Decker pulled her close, and they stood together watching the snow fall, 2 people who had built a life from almost nothing and made it into something beautiful. The house around them was warm and solid, filled with the evidence of their years together. Photographs on the walls, furniture Decker had built, quilts Brianna had sewn, toys waiting for grandchildren to visit. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the house just as it had that first night. But inside, they were safe and warm, surrounded by love and the fruits of decades of partnership. The ranch would endure. Their family would continue. And the story of the mail-order bride who arrived during a blizzard would be told and retold, becoming part of the family's history and identity. Brianna thought about the girl she had been, desperate and hopeful, clutching a carpetbag and stepping into the unknown. She thought about all the moments between then and now, the joys and sorrows, the ordinary days and the extraordinary ones. And she knew with absolute certainty that answering Decker Lawson's advertisement had been the best decision of her life. "I love you," she said, turning to look up at her husband. His face was lined now, his hair silver, but his eyes were the same storm gray that had captivated her from the first moment. And they looked at her, with the same love and devotion they always had. "I love you," Decker replied, and kissed her as the snow fell faster outside, blanketing the world in white. They had weathered many storms together over the years, literal and metaphorical. They had buried loved ones and welcomed new life. They had struggled through hardship and celebrated triumphs. They had argued and made up, hurt each other and forgiven, learned and grown and changed together. And through it all, they had loved each other with a love that started as a fragile hope and grew into something unbreakable. The mail-order bride and the lonely rancher had become Brianna and Decker Lawson. Partners, parents, grandparents, two people who had built a legacy that would outlast them both. As they finally turned away from the window and moved toward the warmth of the fire, Brianna sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. She was grateful for the blizzard that had forced her to Decker's door, grateful for his kindness and patience, grateful for the family they had built and the life they had shared, grateful for every moment, every memory, every day of the remarkable journey they had taken together. The storm outside intensified, but inside the house, there was only warmth and light and love. And as Decker settled into his chair and pulled Brianna onto his lap, just as he had done countless times over the decades, she knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not a single perfect moment, but a lifetime of moments strung together, each one precious because they had lived it together. The blessing the storm had brought had grown and multiplied over the years, expanding to encompass children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors, a whole community built on the foundation of two people who had dared to take a chance on each other. And as the snow continued to fall and the fire crackled in the hearth, Brianna Lawson closed her eyes and smiled, content in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be, held in the arms of the man she loved, surrounded by the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination, and love that had weathered every storm.